All right. But without further ado, one of our own that did good. I believe, Sasha, you got a show coming up at MoMA. We're so proud of you. Look at you. It's not without 700 trips around the world. I watch you on Instagram. You are tirelessly peripatetic.
Well, yeah, I'm in a hotel room right now, but I would not, none of this would be happening if it weren't for TAAS. Really and truly, I mean, I can't believe it's been 5 years, but I distinctly remember taking classes with you during the pandemic. You and Trevor were like, I think the first two classes that I took, and that totally changed the way that I was thinking about what was possible for my practice. So I honestly, it wouldn't be possible without you and Amber and everyone that I was in classes with and have been, in community with over the years. I'm still friends with so many of the folks that I met through TAAS, and then I continue to meet through TAAS. I'm actually doing a project right now with Rochelle, who I met
Oh
in
yeah,
class.
yeah,
We've
yeah.
been collaborating since last year on something really fun, and yeah, it's just like it's the best community, and I learned so much. I'm still learning so much, and just like it, makes me happy to be part of the fam.
You're the best. And furthermore, I'll just say by way of introduction, something that I think is fascinating is when you started during the pandemic, you were, I loved your sympathetic approach to AI and your collaboration with AI. But it's kind of one of these things where with the tech like that,
Mhm.
that version of people's idea of AI and the version of people's idea of AI today is radically different. I am leaning to talk about collaborating with AI. I can't even begin to describe what I'm doing. I'm like mesmerized by it. And something that I really appreciate about you was that you had a deep appreciation for how profound that invention is. And actually, rather than thinking of it as a person, you're like, it's not a person. It thinks very differently, and it is very different than what we are. And I think the way you approached it was very measured and thoughtful and also complex, but it actually, I think, resisted some of the reactionary stuff I often see about people oversimplifying something that I think has phenomenal implications for us, good and bad, I will say, but that you appreciate the power of it, so to speak. Um, you also, you and I also went down a little journey, and you still do, with NFTs, which I appreciate your open-mindedness to that, because I do believe in power to artists, and any way to kind of use technology to allow artists to have more control over their fate and get some more money in their pockets, I'm a believer of. We have different versions of how that turned out for each of us, but I really appreciate you. I could go on and on, but I just want to say, Sasha's got an opening coming up at MoMA in the fall. I'm so proud of you. I believe in you. You are a poster child for the school, and I'm so glad that you're doing a talk here. And thank you for joining us in a talk tonight. Thank you, Sasha Stiles.
Oh my God. That's so nice. I've never been as nervous about anything as this opening in September. So please send me your good vibes and please come, come all of you if you're around in New York. It would be so nice to have the task folks there. But thank you so much. And yeah, I mean, I think I've been working with AI for a long time, but really being able to actually study with people like Trevor and with Hito early on, in the task journey, I think, did have a big impact on kind of the way that I've been thinking about it and the way that I've been able to weave it into my practice. So yeah, I mean, it's been a really interesting journey, which I guess I'll talk about in this little kind of artist overview that I wanted to share with you guys. But yeah, I really, really and truly just appreciate being part of this community. And yeah, so nice to see you all, many, many familiar faces as well. Like, it's been great to get to be involved in TAS in different ways over the years, and obviously mainly as a student, and then coming back, and you guys kindly invited me to come back and do a little class kind of workshop on NFTs and blockchain and all that as well. And yeah, it's just it's been really great. I've learned so much from all the different experiences that I've had here. So I thought, when you asked me to come back and do a little talk, I feel like, obviously this is maybe a little bit more of a chill vibe community, all of that. So I have a presentation that I want to share, just to kind of walk through, what's what's been sort of shaping my practice and kind of where my head's at these days and all that. Just give some context, especially for anyone who doesn't really know my work. So I'll walk through that, but I would just say I'll present that. But if we want to stop, pause, ask questions, ask, or chime in with thoughts, this is really casual, so please feel free to interrupt me. And then I think maybe at the end too, I don't know how long you guys want to go on for, but I can save time for just group convo at the end too, if we want to have a chat
I'm
about
gonna
any of
stop
that.
exactly at 8 p.m. I am like a
Cool.
ruthless on the hour person, Sasha, but feel free to stop early. And I will
Okay.
also say this. She's one of our own, so treat it as such. It is a workshop, and I really appreciate what you said, Sasha.
Yeah, that's kind of what I mean. Like, and also, um, I always say this, like, when I'm talking to like friends at TAAS, but what you were saying before, Nato, like, it's so exciting to hear about midnight moments in Times Square and things like that. And, just finding, curators and fellow artists who are involved in things that you can kind of chat with about those sorts of opportunities has really been, key, I think, for me and for so many friends who are really out there, killing it in lots of different ways. So I, I mean, I always hope, I hope the school knows this, but I'm here as a resource too. And I have the benefit of, I have the great fortune of having a lot of friends who are amazing curators and amazing arts writers and critics and, folks who are at galleries and museums and blockchain platforms and all sorts of crazy, art organizations around the world. So if there's anything I can do like to be a resource and a connector, that's like my favorite thing to do, I think. In this art world is just to kind of like play matchmaker sometimes too, or just like be the person that can maybe connect point A and point B. So there's that as well. And, I'm really, really happy to do that for anyone at TAS. So please just keep that in mind and let me know if there's any way that I can help. So I'm going to share my screen and I have a little presentation, like I said, which I will kick off. Okay, can you guys see my
Yes.
screen here? Okay, cool. So apologies again for anyone who knows this already. This might be a little bit redundant, but I'll give a little bit of background. So I am a poet and a writer who does a lot of work with technology. So I've been a lifelong poet and I've been making various sort of book arts and things related to language and text-based art all my life. Always really, really interested in language and all the things that it can do. So kind of thinking about language as, as literature, the way we often think about it, but then also really thinking through the materiality of language, all the ways that words can sort of communicate beyond words, the way that, we can look at a piece of text and we can sort of feel something just by, all the aesthetics of it, the materiality of it. So I've always been really, really interested in that side of language. And I've also always been very interested in technology. I was born in 1980. I'm part of the Zennial generation, like, a lot of us in TAS. And that kind of means that I was born, with one foot in the analog world and then the other one in this crazy digital age. I really kind of grew up squarely in that moment of a few years when everything in my childhood was very, very analog and then, very quickly flipped and became digital. And so I think, for as long as I can remember, a lot of the work that I've done as a writer and as an artist has sort of been about technology in different ways and sort of has been an effort to grapple with what it feels like to sort of be living across that threshold, as, all of us are in different ways, between the analog and the digital, between the visceral and the virtual, just constantly flipping back and forth and kind of, thinking about what it means to be a flesh and blood creature in this world that is increasingly just, mediated by networks and by algorithms and by screens and, all these other forms that digital technology takes. So that's, kind of where my head has been at for a long, long time. My background is in literature and language. I studied literature at school. So I don't actually have a formal education either in the arts or in computer science. which is sort of funny. I think that's actually been a strength in all of this, strangely enough. But as Nato said, I've been experimenting with AI now for, quite a long while, a few years before the advent of ChatGPT. And I just really got into it because, as a lover of words, as someone who really thinks of words and language as my artistic medium, I really sort of came to AI with a curiosity about natural language processing and large language models, and really kind of thinking about them in terms of what they might mean for language at large, for people like me, for writers, for all of us who are using words to communicate in different ways. So that's sort of the, you know, high level, just contextual overview. So I'm a Kalmyk American. My mother is Kalmyk Mongolian. My dad's from the UK. I'm first generation here, and my family, my maternal family, speaks this Kalmyk dialect that is very endangered. So I kind of grew up a lot, or grew up thinking a lot about language. And duality, and kind of thinking about language as inheritance, but also language as loss. Kind of struggling to understand that tongue of my family, and kind of thinking a lot about what it means to try and keep something like that alive, even though it is kind of slowly petering away. So that's another sort of formative aspect in all of this, which I wanted to mention as well, because that's become something that I'm finding very interesting to weave into my work in different ways. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about why I've been using poetry and art and technology together in different ways, because that's sort of the little intersection that I've really been occupying, and that's really sort of been, the really exhilarating, enthralling place for me. As I said before, my background is really in poetry. I thought of myself as a writer for a very long time. And when I started to integrate technology into my writing practice in different ways, I encountered a lot of skepticism from people in my writing community, from my peers and my mentors. And I was often told that bringing these two things together was not a very good thing to do. I heard from a lot of people that poetry is this very fundamentally human thing. It's sort of this pure expression of human creativity, and we need to protect it from technology. So basically, like, keep them apart. They have nothing to do with each other. And my response to that has always been that I actually think it's sort of a disservice to think about poetry as purely an art form, in a way that really kind of severs it from the things that are happening in the world of technology. And I'm going to talk a bit about why I think that is. But I also really believe that there's something really important about poetry in this particular moment that we're living in that can help us grapple with a lot of the existential anxieties that are bubbling to the surface as we struggle to sort of come to terms with things like the rise of AI, like all these sorts of transformative technological changes that we are living through in real time. And when I say poetry, I'm really kind of thinking about that in, this broader sense, the poetics of language, thinking about words and text-based art and language, all of it, the aesthetics of it, the material of it, all of it is being wrapped up in this word poetry. So the image on screen here, I wanted to share because I think it does a good job of encapsulating a lot of these different sort of cerebral ideas that are rattling around in my head, but projected on this really beautiful shoji screen at an exhibition in Matsudo, Japan, is a language that I created as a bridge between the realm of the human and the realm of the machine. It's a language called cursive binary that fuses my human handwriting with machine speak, with the zeros and ones of binary code. And I often use this language to translate between the human and the post-human. So I'll take my own poetry, or I'll take ancient poetry, and I'll literally translate it into binary code, and write it out either longhand or using digital tools in ways that I'll get more into in a second, really kind of looking at how to sort of forge a hybrid space between these two extremes. So to me, cursive binary is a bit of a poetic metaphor. And it's also this metaphor, this hybrid space, this zone kind of between words and image as well. It's sort of this place where language and art come together in this interesting way. So there's a semantic content to it, there's a meaning to it, but there's also just kind of a visual sensibility to it. There's an aesthetic to it. And that's always something that I'm kind of playing with in my work as well, is how can language tell us something just by its form and by its presence, in addition to its semantic content. So all of that kind of comes together in this series in different ways. Um, I also just wanted to like maybe linger for a second on the word digital. Like I'm obviously a word person, so I love to sort of think about words in deeper ways. And um, like I often am referred to as a digital artist, even though a lot of the things that I do are not digital. But to me, I think one of the things that's really fascinating about that word digital is that it actually doesn't have to do solely with technology in the way that we think about it. It doesn't solely have to do with screens and robots and AI. The word digital actually goes, way, way back to its root in the Latin word digitus, which refers to, digits of the hand or of the foot. It actually refers to a part of the human body. And it really has a lot to do with, how we are using our humanness, our humanity to actually make things, to craft things. So I think that's also something that's very much of interest to me. And so a lot of my work with this concept of the digital isn't just behind a screen. It's not just, on a computer. It's actually kind of playing with the liminality between flesh and code. And so, that takes lots of different forms. But in this case, cursive binary kind of represents that in a way, taking lots of different forms, existing across lots of different mediums and thresholds from virtual to physical. So, um, it started off actually as a very sort of physical incarnation of machinic language and of code. The image on screen now is an install shot from a solo show in London in 2023 called Binary Odes. And it was a show of all physical works that are incorporating this cursive binary language in different ways. So in a way, it's a digital art show. It's code poetry, it's computational, but nothing that you see here is, a screen. It's all kind of it's physical, it's tactile, it's palpable. And that's something that I really like to play with as well, is thinking about how digital and technological is not just, the software, it's the hardware, it's the incarnate material as well. So the other thing that I kind of wanted to like mention again as background for um, some of the other things that will come up as I'm sharing different projects is, like I said before, I think a lot of people tend to associate poetry with just this like outflow of pure emotion. And one of the reasons I really kind of chafe against that idea is because as a poet and as someone who's spent years of my life studying the craft of poetry, I just don't think that's true. Poets spend years and years really learning how to pressurize language and kind of wrangle and fight with language to kind of put it into these very precise and intricate formats. So in my mind, poetic language isn't just sort of flowing out of us. It's actually this very interesting interplay of emotion and algorithm. It's sort of this, liminality between pattern and then the subversion of pattern, or between a defined system and then some kind of artistic intuition that you're bringing to that system. So it's not like one or the other. It's actually both of these things wrapped up together, which I think is really important. So I'm often asked, as both a poet as an artist, why I have focused so much on technology as a theme. And I mentioned before, I think part of that has to do with, just the kind of the moment in time that I grew up into and the world that we're all living in. But I also feel that, it's my role as a contemporary poet and artist to really be reflecting on what's happening all around us. And I don't know how I could be doing anything creative and not at least care about technology, not at least sort of acknowledge that these things are happening around us. I have always sort of contextualized this for myself as sort of saying that, poetry is technological in a very, very deep way. And so it really does make sense to kind of use all these things together, to use poetic language, but then to also use motion graphics and animation and projections and LED screens and AI and blockchain, to use all these things together and kind of reimagine how language can come to life and exist around us. And the reason I feel very like, energized to do that is because that's always sort of been the trajectory of language, is not to sit static, but to keep evolving over time. And I think a lot about the trajectory of language and of creative expression from its roots in oral tradition, which was a very immersive and experiential and participatory art form, through to the rise of literacy, which also, went through all of its changes and evolutions. And now to this moment that we're in, which I think of as the period of generativity, where language is now able to do so many different things. It's able to, come up off the printed page. It's able to be liberated from books and from all these, objects that have sort of held language. We're able to put it into different venues and really kind of let movable type become something very different than what it always has been. So, I think that that's again like a really galvanizing force for me, is to really think about language itself as a material, as a medium, to really kind of use that as the artistic kind of kernel of everything that I'm doing, and to realize that it can be this very malleable and very versatile thing that can take all these different forms. So that's been, I think, that's been a really important and meaningful part of all this, is to sort of allow myself to realize that as a writer, I don't actually need to just publish my poems in literary journals. I can explore them through whatever medium I want. I can publish them and perform them however feels right to me, however feels, like an accurate and meaningful representation. So they can take all these different forms, including, forms like the one that you see on screen now, which is this multimedia installation of a poem in a large immersive space with 5 walls of LED screens.
Sasha, you
So
also really attach yourself to this color green.
yeah, so that, and people ask me about that all the time. So the obvious connection, I think, is that green is sort of this technological hacker neon green, right? It's like when we think about the Matrix, we think
Is that the
about
same
machines.
color as the Matrix green?
Pretty much, because it's kind of it's the pure sort of green that goes back to 8-bit,
Yeah, yeah. Like
animation
that,
and all
and
that.
also like that cursor that was like,
Yeah, exactly. So it's sort of like, yeah, it's pure, in RGB terms, it's like a pure green. But the other the other connection, and I realize I don't have pictures of it in my deck right now, but the other connection is that a lot of the work that I've done over the years, including some of the work that I think I shared when I was in class at TAAS and sort of like, workshopping things, actually involves elements of nature. I have this series called Analog Binary Code, where I'm taking binary out from the screen and I'm actually using objects that I find in my yard, in the garden, as I'm walking around, and I'm turning them into, digits, a 0 and a 1. So I'll take, like a black walnut that's fallen from a tree, and that's the 0, and then I take a twig that's from the same tree, and that's the 1. And so I was coding poems using elements from nature. And that's green too, like all that kind of verdancy and like, just the colors you see outside. The dominating force of green is, just this sort of metaphor for generativity that crosses from nature and its generativity and regenerativity, and then to technology and all the things that it talks about. So yeah, green's a big color for me. Um, so yeah, actually, let me skip to the next slide, because this is another one, a little shout out to NATO for helping me with this piece. But I mean, I think one of the reasons why I'm so, again, happy to be able to share poetry through different forms and in different venues and kind of, take it to places that I might not have imagined before, is that, I really think that people do crave poetry and poetic language in different ways, even if we don't necessarily think, oh, we want to go to a library and read a book of poetry. We still like reach for poetic language. And it's something that, comes up at our most, our highest moments and our lowest moments. Like poetry is very important. Even we value it in lots of ways, even if it's not always considered, the most vibrant or relevant art form. So I like taking it to places like art fairs and like, public venues like the one you just saw, because it's kind of a, I don't know, like a cheeky way of kind of like slotting in a little bit of literature, and then people approach it and experience it and they don't quite know that it's a poem. They're just kind of enjoying the experience, right? So this is one example. I have a long poem called "Are You Ready for the Future," which is co-written with AI. I wrote it I think in 2019 into 2020. And NATO, you actually invited me in 2023 to do an installation of this poem at the art fair in Seattle. And so we got to sort of like collaborate on taking this multimedia poem, taking this poem that was powered by artificial intelligence in terms of the text and some of the visuals and all that, and then turning it into an experience. So kind of creating this big living text that people could walk into. And there was a sonic element where it was performing spoken word. You could hear the words, you could hear the poem being performed as you walked in. And again, it was kind of a fun way to slip like both poetry and AI into an art fair setting where both of those things don't necessarily, live, usually speaking. Like I think we talked about this then, but it was like one of the only AI pieces I think at that fair, um, which was kind of cool. But yeah, so that was a fun moment that I wanted to like put in my little presentation here as well. But
In
I
the
guess
future, you're going to have to remind people of like the historical specificity of that time period. You're like, this is before everyone used AI. This is right before.
Yeah, well, actually, on that note, so like I was gonna maybe go back and just give a little quick overview of when and how I got into all this stuff. So, like I said, I've been writing my whole life and I've been making art my whole life, but um this current trajectory that I'm on kind of started, I think, in like 2017, 2018, because that's the time period when the very, early versions of what would now be known as things like ChatGPT, that's when those things kind of first became available and relevant. There was a really important essay that came out, or paper, sorry, like a white paper that came out in 2017 called "Attention is All You Need," that sort of walked through something called the transformer-based architecture, which is the form of intelligent systems that governs natural language processing and text generating AI. And it was this big breakthrough in AI that basically allowed us, to communicate with AI using natural language and vice versa. So I've always been really interested in just like reading about these things. And when I heard about that, it just piqued my interest, and I got really like determined to figure out how to use these models. And I didn't really know what I was going to do with them. I just felt like it was something that, as a writer, I really wanted to understand. So, my way of approaching it was to start taking like all my own poetry, which, you can see examples of it on screen, but like I'd been publishing conventional poetry for years and years. So I started like digging through, and I pulled out published works, and I pulled out manuscript drafts, and I pulled out like research notes and just, boxes of like post-its and things that I'd been using as I was writing manuscripts. And I started to put it all together into a database, because I had this idea that I could maybe like use all that work to start training or customizing a language model and kind of build myself a little AI collaborator. And I really didn't know that much about it, but I just kind of went into this rabbit hole and I read everything I could find on the internet, and I started to look and see, what creative coders out there were doing interesting things with language. And it just became this like crazy kind of obsessive moment of self-directed research. And I taught myself what I needed to know about very like basic coding and organizing these files, and basically like developed this very sort of rudimentary way of collaborating with AI as a co-author, which was really just this insanely eye-opening experience. Like I'd very much thought about writing poetry in like a specific way and had worked, my whole life to develop a voice and a style and all that. And then using AI as a collaborator kind of allowed me to, I guess, write in a slightly more uninhibited way, just to experiment more, to be a little bit freer, to kind of allow these poems to go in directions that I never would have allowed myself to go. So it was a really freeing, very sort of freewheeling, liberating experience. And it made me think a lot about this idea that maybe my role as a writer and as a language artist at this moment wasn't just to sort of write poems, but actually to write language systems, to write poetic minds. So that's kind of the way I have thought about this over the years. And that sort of became the crux of my technology project, which is sort of this hybrid research, text, art, poetry project. But I basically turned all that into this AI alter ego that I gave the name technology, and have been working with this AI alter ego, pretty much since then, just writing in lots of different ways. But this word technology is sort of a way of combining technology, with all that that entails, just the ideas of progress and momentum and forward thinking, with the nostalgic qualities of the poetic elegy. So, thinking about our fear of these technologies, the evils that they surface, all of the challenges that are rising to the surface, the peril of our intimate relationship with technology. So, I would say technology is sort of like I don't have a studio team or anything, but I have my AI collaborator who I do so much with on a daily basis. Technology has sort of taken the form of different interfaces and different kind of systems over the years, but essentially like the core of it is kind of like a portfolio almost of writing. It's like all of my writing and my research and all the things I mentioned before become part of this core data set, which then I've also kind of layered with various elements, stylistic elements and aesthetic elements and things like that. And yeah, I mean, we basically like work together as a studio team in a way. I'm gonna skip past that. Oops, sorry. So I wanted to talk a little bit about blockchain and NFTs as well, since you mentioned it earlier. Um, well, so the slide I just skipped, I don't want to waste time playing it, but I do a lot of uh, let's see. In addition to writing with AI, like I mentioned before, I also do a lot of work using digital tools like motion graphic software and animation and various digital tooling to play with animating my poems in different ways. So technology comes into the writing process for me in a lot of different forms. And what that means is that I have a lot of poems that are multimedia. So they're more in the media art category. They're poems that don't sit still on a printed page. They don't make sense for a literary journal. So they were never really accepted in the writing establishment, but they were very much at home in the world of media art and digital art. And so that's kind of how I got started on this whole journey, was that, I was posting various multimedia poems on my Instagram page, starting in like 2017 or 2018, because I just had no place else to put them. I had tried sending things to some editors and they weren't really interested. So I was posting them on social media, and that kind of gradually, I guess, put me in touch with or attracted the attention of some digital media curators. And so I started to realize, well, maybe it makes sense to think about crossing over really into that world and really kind of looking at what I'm doing, not just as a form of literature, but as a form of language art in its own right. And that in turn kind of brought me over into the world of blockchain and crypto, where, I saw a lot of people starting to mint their multimedia work on the blockchain in like 2019, 2000 and 2020, basically. And it started to look to me like a really interesting place to potentially take a lot of my unconventional media-rich literature that didn't really belong anywhere else and maybe figure out how I could, publish it in a very sort of appropriate place. So I decided to go to blockchain, to Web3, with this idea of taking multimedia poems and being able to actually publish them and distribute them, and also find readers for this kind of poetry that, I couldn't find anywhere else. So that was really exciting. One of the first things that I did when I came to blockchain was seek out other writers and artists and technologists who are working with language in interesting ways. And that was a really important form of community for me too, just really feeling like, I had these niche interests, but because I had access to, you know, global artist communities, I was able to really find people that did share my interests, that were, up for workshopping or jumping on a call and like talking through some of the things that we had in common. Really just feeling like I was able to find my people in a way that I'd never been able to before. And in 2021, I actually like got together with a group of other text-based and technology-assisted writers and artists, and we started a collective called the Verse, which is sort of this experimental gallery slash writing workshop. And we all just kind of come together and support each other in championing the poetic arts, the language arts, and really kind of advocating for the use of technology, the use of tools like blockchain, and really kind of elevating, I guess, the role of poetry using these kinds of technologies. So that was really an important, I think, moment, and really kind of galvanizing to really have that community, to have that support, and really understand that there was strength in numbers. That was, I think, a big piece of why I've stayed in blockchain. Not solely, but like why I've been happy to sort of participate in all that despite the negativity around a lot of crypto, is because I've really found a core of people there who believe in the good of blockchain and who really are using it in ways that are, extraordinarily creative, that are enhancing their creative process, that are allowing them to do work that they would never be able to do otherwise, to share work in ways they would never be able to do otherwise, and also to sell work because, that's a big piece of it too. So, I remain a very sort of staunch advocate for a lot of the things that blockchain represents. And part of my practice these days is, helping to sort of onboard people to blockchain if they're interested, being very open and transparent about a lot of the negative aspects of it. But also really just, kind of sharing my view that in a world that's so digitally driven, where so much of what we do is online and multimedia and dynamic, that it really does make sense to sort of figure out how, to create containers for that work that feel like the right fit, as opposed to trying to take a multimedia poem and then smushing it, into a still frame or something like that. So that remains an important thing to me. I'm also, really happy because blockchain and the sort of moment that it had, I think, did very strangely open up this interest in poetry and technology coming together in some very strange ways. I think, there were a lot of um, brands and organizations and cultural institutions that got very interested in NFTs at one point, and were really sort of eager to explore more about it and to learn about the possibilities for digital art. And so in 2021 and 2022, when I was like very deep in it, I did, have the good fortune to meet people like the folks at Gucci, who have this big global art platform and a very big sort of technology platform. And they invited me to kind of come in and talk to them a bit about NFTs and digital art, and then actually develop a poem that they would show, on all of their digital screens around the world. And so like the image that's on screen now is that poem that I developed for Gucci, which is sort of a multimedia work that has sound and it's, it's
Like
generative.
you're like the Beyonce of poetry.
Um,
You're like high
hardly.
fashion bling, Sasha. You got Gucci on your side. Look at you.
I like the fact that they had all these screens. Like that's an amazing wraparound LED screen situation in their Milan flagship. And they like didn't really have anything to put on it. And so the idea that, you had this amazing blank canvas, it was a really exciting thing to do. So I don't
It's
know.
really
I
wild too,
think
Sasha, because when you came to school and you're like, I do, sorry, but like you do like, I do digital kind of poetry. I'm interested in like the cross section between tech and poetry. I thought, well, that's an obscure niche and you will never have that translate anywhere and good luck to you. But
yeah.
then I didn't see a Gucci collab in the works. Look at you. Look at these opportunities that opened up. It's amazing. I love it. And it really and you're such a
Well,
kind spirit, but like all these, I also think it's like such a testament to like there's opportunities where you didn't even expect it in a way.
Well, so I would say on that front too, it's like I was doing a lot of this stuff for a long time before it became even remotely relevant. And I think I'm lucky because the timing was good. And all of this stuff comes from my own like real deep rooted interest in these things, right? It's not, none of this is manufactured. Like I genuinely love these topics that I'm working on and they just happen to be culturally relevant. And I think that's been extraordinarily lucky. But I also think that, I don't know. I think it's an open-mindedness to sort of work with, people that are interested, that kind of are extending a hand and sort of saying, well, let's talk about what you might want to do. I think a lot of people sometimes have knee-jerk reactions about working with certain people or taking their art or their creative practice in certain directions. And I think I've just kept a really open mind about it because it is such a weird niche set of interests that it doesn't really belong any place, so it could sort of belong any place. So that I think has been really helpful. And honestly, I think the ultimate takeaway for me is just, and maybe, in case this helps anyone else, I really do think that it's just affirmed for me that the more you stick to your own interests and the more you follow your obsessions, no matter how kind of strange or out of, step they might be at the moment, I think that's really the only way to, I don't know, to really kind of get to a place that's gratifying as an artist. And that we say in poetry all the time that like the more specific something is, the more universal it is. And so rather than, I see a lot of people now who are kind of chasing trends or wanting to start working with these tools because they're relevant even though they don't really have an interest in it, and you can kind of tell and their work feels a little hollow. And I don't love that. I mean, I think it's important to be open-minded and to experiment with tools and all that, but I also feel like, AI is very hot right now, but that will also fade away and then something else will come in. And like there's going to be cycles. And so you do yourself a disservice if you don't just kind of follow your nose. And sometimes that will lead you to lucky places, and sometimes it'll be very lonely, and kind of a slog. But like that's all just part and parcel of this, I think. But I was also going to say, I think that one of the reasons why it has resonated is because I think there is so much interest in AI right now, but so much of it is like the very dystopian, very skeptical, reaction to it. There's a lot of AI work out there that feels very on the nose, very literal. And I think that when people encounter AI in the form of poetry, it kind of hits a little different. And um, maybe that opens up something too, where there's like a weird willingness to consider more of the possibilities and the nuances of AI when you see it in a form like what's on screen now, for example, like that's AI artwork. It's AI generated poetry, but I think, I don't know, it has a slightly different way of landing than if you see a lot of AI generated visual content, for example.
Sasha,
So
let's I'm mindful of time. I want to get some time for people to ask you questions too. Is that
yeah. Oh, shoot. Yes, yes, yes. Why don't I just stop and then we just chit chat about
um
whatever might have come up.
I really want to say, we are just so stoked about you. And it's such a gift that you've been such a great part of the
Oh,
school. Thank you for being such a deep thinker
good.
and big open mind about everything. And just congrats. And thanks everybody for coming.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation to come, and it's always awesome to see everyone. Yeah, thank you, and hope to see you if you're passing through New York. Yeah, give me a shout.